Let me ask you something. Are you absolutely certain, 100% positive, that you know where to find roach in the dead of winter? Because what I'm about to show you might just prove that decades of common knowledge have been leading you completely astray. Today, we're not just talking about roach depth. We're talking about the fundamental mistake almost every single angler makes when the ice gets thick and the bites get shy. It's a mistake passed down from father to son, from one fishing buddy to another. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your sonar is marking fish you can't seem to catch. And you'll have a new strategy that puts you right on top of the big, suspended schools of fish. So, let me ask you again, do you still think they're glued to the bottom? Let's find out. For as long as any of us have been fishing, we've heard the same thing. When winter hits, fish go deep. They get lethargic. They hug the bottom where the water is warmest. It's simple. It makes a certain kind of sense, and it's what the old-timers have always told us. So we follow the advice. We go out there, we drill our holes over the deepest parts of the lake, and we send our jig straight to the mud. Then we sit there for hours, wondering why we're not getting a single bite. We blame the atmospheric pressure, the bright sun, a bad moon phase, anything and everything except our own technique. This deep-seated belief is so strong that it forces us to ignore the very evidence our own electronics are showing us. It's a habit, a tradition. But traditions don't put fish on the ice. The truth about the underwater world in winter is far more complex and far more interesting than that old simple rule. Picture the classic scene. It's early morning. The sun is just a pale, weak glow on the horizon, and the air is so cold it stings your face. You're out on the ice. The silence is absolute, broken only by the crunch of your boots on the snow and the high-pitched whine of the auger as it bites into 12 inches of solid ice. You drill your first hole, then a second and a third, right over that spot where you absolutely hammered them in late fall. You feel that familiar surge of confidence. You've got the best bait, the most sensitive rod, and years of experience on your side. You drop your line, the tiny jig sinking down, down, down into the dark water below. You know the drill. You let it hit the bottom, feel that little thump, give it a little lift, and then you start the weight. It's a ritual, a process you've repeated 1,000 times. You are absolutely convinced that you are in the perfect spot and doing the exact right thing. You're ready to fill a bucket. Now, let's talk about that core belief, the bottom dogma. This idea is drilled into us from our very first fishing trip. In winter, fish metabolism slows down. They conserve energy, so naturally, they must sink to the deepest, most stable part of the lake and stay there. We envision them finning slowly, just inches off the silt, picking off the occasional bloodworm. Every piece of advice reinforces this. Every article from 20 years ago says the same thing. And for some species, in some lakes, there's a grain of truth to it. But for roach, especially in fertile lakes with a lot of vegetation, this assumption is your #1 enemy. It puts mental blinders on you. You become so focused on the bottom 6 inches of the water column that you completely ignore the other 20, 30, or even 40 feet of water above it. This mindset is the single biggest reason for blanking in the dead of winter. So you're sitting there staring at your rod tip, jigging on the bottom. 5 minutes pass, then 10, then 30. Nothing. Not a tap, not a bump. The first seeds of doubt begin to sprout. You rebait your hook with a fresh maggot. You try a different color jig. You change your jigging cadence from slow and subtle to sharp and aggressive. Still nothing. You tell yourself they're just being picky today. You think, maybe I'll drill another hole a few feet away. You do. You repeat the entire process, sending the jig straight back down to the bottom. An hour goes by. The optimism you started the day with is starting to fade, replaced by a cold, familiar frustration. You start to think about packing it in early. The fish just aren't on the feed today. Or are they? The problem isn't the fish's appetite. The problem is their address. You're knocking on the door of an empty house. This is where modern technology comes in. But it often just adds to the confusion if you're stuck in the old way of thinking. You turn on your fish finder, your flasher, or your sonar, and you see it. You see these faint and sometimes not so faint lines suspended 10, maybe 15 feet below the ice in 30 feet of water. What's the first thing you think? Ah, it must be interference. Or, those are just tiny bait fish, not the big roach I'm after. Or the most common one, that can't be roach. Roach are on the bottom. So you completely ignore them. You see the evidence with your own eyes, clear as day on the screen. But your brain refuses to accept it because it contradicts what you believe to be true. The fish finder isn't lying to you. You're lying to yourself. Those suspended marks are exactly what you came here for. They are the roach. They are just not where you expect them to be. So, why are they up there? To understand that, we need to talk about the one thing all fish need to survive, even more than food: oxygen. Let's think about what a lakebed is like, especially in a productive body of water. It's covered in a layer of dead and decaying weeds, leaves, and other organic matter from the previous summer and fall. As soon as the lake freezes over, it's sealed off from the atmosphere. No new oxygen can get in from the wind and waves. That decomposition process on the bottom, however, doesn't stop. It's carried out by bacteria, and those bacteria consume enormous amounts of dissolved oxygen. Over the course of the winter, this process can turn the bottom few feet of the lake into a low oxygen or even zero oxygen zone. It's a dead zone. The water might be the warmest, but it's unlivable. A fish holding there would suffocate. This creates what we can call an oxygen trap. For a roach, going to the bottom isn't just uncomfortable, it can be fatal. They have an innate ability to sense dissolved oxygen levels. They will actively avoid these areas, pushing up higher in the water column to find water that they can actually breathe. This is especially true in shallower, weedy lakes or the shallow bays of larger lakes. The very places that are so full of life in the summer become hostile environments near the bottom in the winter. Think about it from the fish's perspective. You have a choice between water that is a degree or two warmer, but where you can't breathe, or water that is slightly colder, but has plenty of oxygen. It's not a choice at all. You choose survival. You choose the oxygen. This is the first major key to understanding why they suspend in mid-water. They are forced up from the bottom by their most basic biological need. So if the bottom is bad, where do they go? They move into what I call the comfort zone. This isn't a specific depth, but rather a layer or a band in the water column. This layer has the best available combination of two key factors: sufficient dissolved oxygen and a stable water temperature. It's also often where their food source is. They're not looking for the absolute warmest water if it lacks oxygen. They're not looking for the most oxygenated water if it's freezing cold right under the ice. They are looking for the compromise, the sweet spot. This comfort zone is a dynamic, living thing. It can be 5 feet thick or 10 feet thick. It can be 10 feet down one day and 15 feet down the next, depending on snow cover, sunlight penetration, and how long the lake has been frozen. Your job as an angler is no longer to find a spot on the bottom, but to find this invisible layer of life in the middle of nowhere. Here is a great way to visualize it. Imagine the water column is a layered cake. The bottom layer, the lake bed, is made of that thick, dark mud and decaying weeds. In the dead of winter, this layer has gone bad. It's the spoiled part of the cake that you wouldn't want to eat. The very top layer, right under the ice, is often the coldest and can be less stable. But that big, thick section in the middle, that's the good part. That's the moist cake with the cream filling. That's where all the good stuff is. The roach are not going to hang out in the spoiled bottom layer, and they're not going to press up against the cold, hard top. They are going to suspend right in that sweet, creamy middle. Our entire strategy needs to shift from trying to scrape crumbs off the bottom plate to finding the exact location of that delicious middle layer. It's a complete change in perspective that opens up a whole new world of possibilities. Now, some of you might be thinking about the thermocline. In summer, we know that lakes stratify into a warm upper layer and a cold bottom layer, separated by a sharp temperature gradient called the thermocline. But in winter, that whole system flips upside down. This is called inverse stratification. Water is at its densest at about 4 degrees Celsius or 39 degrees Fahrenheit. This dense water sinks to the bottom. So technically, the old-timers are right. The warmest water is indeed at the very bottom of the lake. The water just below the ice might be near freezing 0 degrees Celsius or 32 Fahrenheit, while the bottom is a relatively balmy 4 degrees. This scientific fact is what has propped up the fish on the bottom myth for so long. It seems logical. If you were a fish, wouldn't you want to be in the warmest water available? The logic is sound, but it's missing the other half of the equation. So let's ask the critical question again. If the warmest water is on the bottom, why aren't the roach there? We've already answered it, but it bears repeating because it is the most important concept in this entire video. Because oxygen trumps temperature, always. A fish can tolerate being slightly colder than it prefers. It cannot tolerate not being able to breathe. That 4-degree water on the bottom is useless to them if it's an oxygen desert. It's like offering a thirsty man a beautiful golden goblet filled with sand. It looks appealing, but it provides no life-sustaining value. The roach will always prioritize breathable water over slightly warmer water. Their survival instinct is hardwired to seek out oxygen. Once you truly grasp this one concept, the sight of suspended fish on your sonar will no longer be a mystery. It will be an invitation. It will be the X that marks the spot. Think of this mid-water zone as a kind of underwater highway. The roach are not just sitting there motionless. They are using this layer to move, to socialize, and to feed. In many lakes, large schools of roach will cruise at a very specific depth, following contour lines or structure, but doing so 10 or 20 feet off the bottom. They might be relating to a deep weed edge, but they'll be suspended above the tops of the weeds, not buried inside them. They might be over the deepest part of the basin, but they'll be halfway down the water column. By fishing on the bottom, your lure is completely out of their world. It's like trying to catch birds by putting a worm on the sidewalk. You're not even in the right dimension. You have to get your bait off the ground and put it right in the middle of their highway. You need to intercept them where they live, not where you think they should live. A fair question to ask is, what are they even eating up there in the middle of the water column? It's a great question. We tend to think of bottom-dwelling insects and larvae as their primary winter food. And they do eat those, but they are not the only thing on the menu. The water is full of life that we can't see with the naked eye. This includes various forms of zooplankton, tiny microscopic creatures that drift in the water. These little organisms are a crucial food source, and they often concentrate at specific depths where light penetration and temperature are optimal. The roach, with their incredible eyesight, are perfectly adapted to pick off these tiny morsels. They don't need to root around in the mud to find a meal. They can simply cruise through the water column, sipping on this plankton soup. It's an energy-efficient way to feed, which is critical when their metabolism is low. So they follow the food, and in winter the food is often suspended. So here's the moment on the ice where the theory gets put into practice. You've been blanking on the bottom for an hour, you're cold, you're frustrated, and you're watching those mysterious marks on your fish finder that are suspended 20 feet down in 40 feet of water. This is the turning point. This is where you have to make a conscious decision to abandon a lifetime of habit. You have to say to yourself, okay, forget the bottom. It's not working. What have I got to lose? You reel up your line, not just a foot or two, but a significant distance. You reel it halfway up the water column. You decide to target those marks directly. You stop your jig at 20 feet. It feels wrong. It feels unnatural. Every instinct in your body is screaming at you to drop it back down to the safety and familiarity of the bottom. But you resist. You hold it there, suspended in the vast nothingness, and you wait. And then it happens. Your rod tip, which has been motionless for over an hour, gives a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch. You're not even sure you saw it. Then it happens again, a more confident tap-tap. Your heart starts to pound. You're laser-focused on that rod tip. Suddenly it pulls down with a satisfying solid weight. You set the hook, and for the first time all day, you feel the thumping life of a fish on the other end. It's not a monster, but it's a fish. You bring it up through the hole, a beautiful silver winter roach. And the first thing you notice is where you hooked it. It didn't tentatively mouth the bait. It inhaled it. It was actively feeding at that depth. The feeling is a mix of relief, excitement, and a profound sense of discovery. It's that aha moment. The light bulb goes on. It wasn't the fish. It wasn't the bait. It was you. You were in the wrong place the whole time. Now the question is, was that just a fluke? A single lucky fish that happened to be swimming by? The only way to know for sure is to repeat it. You quickly unhook the roach and drop your jig right back down the hole. You don't guess at the depth. You carefully measure it out, either by counting the turns of your reel handle or pulling it out hand over hand to get back to that exact same magic depth of 20 feet. You hold it there, and within a minute, tap, tap, thump. Another one. This time it's a bigger one. You land it, and the excitement builds. This is a pattern. This isn't luck. You've just cracked the code for the day. You drop down again, and again you get a bite. You've gone from zero action, from total frustration and boredom, to fast and furious fishing, all because you made one simple change. You stopped fishing on the bottom. You stopped fishing based on myth and started fishing based on observation. Once you confirm the pattern, you can refine it. How do you systematically find this magic depth on any given day? It's simple, but it requires patience. Start by dropping your lure just a few feet below the ice and fish there for 5 minutes. Nothing? Drop it down another 2 feet. Fish for 5 minutes. Keep repeating this process, methodically working your way down through the water column, 2 feet at a time. Pay close attention to your electronics if you have them, and if you see suspended marks, stop and focus on that depth. But even without electronics, this method works. Eventually, you will hit that active zone and you'll get a bite. Once you do, that's your starting point for the day. You may find that as the day goes on, the fish move up or down slightly, so you have to be willing to keep adjusting. This active searching approach is far more effective and engaging than just sitting and waiting for a fish to find your bait on the bottom. It's always interesting to watch how this plays out on a frozen lake. Imagine this scenario. You're now catching roach consistently, one after another, from that mid-water depth. 50 yards away, there's another angler. He's been there just as long as you. He's a classic bottom fisher. He hasn't had a bite all day. He sees you pulling fish out, so he wanders over. "What are you using?" he asks. You show him your jig. "I'm using the same thing," he says, confused. "How deep is it here?" you ask. "About 30 feet, he replies. Then you ask the key question, "And where are you fishing?" "On the bottom, of course. Where else would they be?" he says, as if it's the most obvious thing in the world. You just smile and tell him, "Try coming up about 10 feet. He looks at you like you have 3 heads. He might scoff and walk away, sticking to his old methods, or he might just be frustrated enough to try it. And if he does, you'll have made another convert. Fishing for suspended fish often requires a slight adjustment in your gear and presentation. Because you're not resting on the bottom, your jig is subject to any underwater currents, and line twist can become more of an issue. This is where lighter jigs can be a huge advantage. A heavy jig will plummet through that feeding zone too quickly. A lighter jig, something like a tungsten jig, which is small but dense, can be held at a precise depth more easily. It also flutters more naturally on the drop. Your float or strike indicator also becomes more critical. You need something extremely sensitive that will register the subtle upward bites that often happen when a roach inhales a bait and continues swimming at the same level. This isn't about power, it's about finesse. You are targeting fish that are often just sipping at tiny food particles, so your presentation needs to be delicate and precise. Now, it is crucial to understand that 20 feet down is not a magic number that works everywhere. The key takeaway from this video is not a new, rigid rule to replace the old one. The takeaway is a principle. The principle is that you must abandon the assumption that roach are on the bottom and start your search in the middle of the water column. The exact depth of the comfort zone will change from lake to lake and from day to day. In a deeper, clearer lake, it might be 30 feet down. In a shallower, stained lake, it might only be 8 feet down. Sunlight, snow cover, oxygen levels, and food availability are all factors. The lesson is not fish at 20 feet. The lesson is stop assuming and start searching. Be a detective. Use your tools and your senses to find where the fish are on that specific day, in that specific lake. That is the true art of angling. So let's look at the end result of this shift in thinking. On the left, you have the bucket of the bottom fisher. It's empty. He had a long, cold, frustrating day. He's heading home, convinced the fish just weren't biting. On the right, you have your bucket. It has a nice catch of beautiful, healthy roach. You had an exciting, engaging day. You solved a puzzle. You learned something. The difference wasn't the spot. It wasn't the bait. It wasn't luck. The difference was a single decision. The decision to challenge a long-held belief and fish where the evidence pointed, not where tradition dictated. The proof, as they say, is in the pudding, or in this case, in the bucket. This one simple change in your vertical approach can and will transform your success rate when ice fishing for roach. It is, without a doubt, the #1 secret that separates the consistently successful winter angler from the rest. So, what did we really learn today? The age-old advice to fish the bottom for winter roach isn't just a little outdated. It can be the very reason you're going home empty-handed time and time again. The real action, the true life of the lake in the dead of winter, is often happening in that suspended comfort zone, driven by oxygen and food, not by a degree or two of temperature. The single most unexpected, game-changing moment for any angler is when they catch that first fish, 10, 20, or even 30 feet off the bottom after staring at a dead rod for hours. That's the what et a poverot, the holy cow moment. It's the point where you realize that you've been ignoring the most obvious clues from your electronics and the environment for years, simply because you were stuck in a mindset passed down through generations. The fish were literally screaming at you where they were. We just refused to listen. This changes everything about how you approach the ice. Your search is no longer just horizontal, from one hole to the next. It's vertical. Every single hole you drill is a new world to explore from top to bottom. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. If this blew your mind, or if you've experienced this yourself, do me a favor and crush that like button and subscribe for more tips that challenge the status quo. Now I have to ask you, what's the one golden rule of fishing that you've always secretly questioned? Drop it in the comments below. Let's start a real conversation.